Welcome everyone. It is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful to be with you today. We are here with the Network for College Success and excited to celebrate 15 years with them, 15 years of incredible work, and to hear about some of the work that's happened and some of the work that's coming down the line and all of the amazing things they're doing in Chicago and around the country. Before we get to that, want to share a few things with you. Just a few upcoming events, and if you look in the chat, you'll see some links to these if you want to sign up. Next Thursday, we'll be joined by Bridget Davis, who spent several years doing research on CPS grads, in particular Noble grads, and their experiences in college and the transition to college. Some fascinating research that we're really, really excited to learn about ourselves and to share with all of you. That'll be next week. In a few weeks, we will be releasing a new research brief on elementary on track and sort of defining elementary on track. We'll be showing links between elementary on track and high school freshman on track, high school graduation, college enrollment. We'll be releasing a new version of our milestones tool, which will have data on every elementary school in the city and show for all of those elementary schools their high school on track rates, their high school graduation rates, and their high school and their college enrollment rates. So really excited for that research and tool release. Please mark that date. About a week later, we'll be joined by two of the schools that are part of our to and through middle grades network, Brighton Park Elementary and Columbia Explorers Academy. Both schools have been working for the past few years on making the work in their classrooms more meaningful. In particular, they've been using a really neat survey instrument called Elevate, and they're excited to share some of that work with you. So please join us to hear about how some of the focus on elementary on track leads ultimately into the classroom and to making work in classrooms more meaningful. After Thanksgiving in early December, we'll be joined by two alums of the Network for College Success. Jackie Lemon and Rito Martinez are going to be talking about centering equity in organizational change and what it means to be an equity-focused, anti-racist organization, how that work begins, how it moves forward. So please join us for that. And then finally, I'll be leading a session on December 6th called The Case for Making Chicago's Selective High Schools and Colleges Less Selective. So this will be about some of our selective enrollment high schools. It'll be about, in particular, Northwestern and the University of Chicago, and which students are going to those different schools, and why I think we should make those schools, all of those schools, less selective. So please join us for all of those events. You see the links there. I'm going to stop sharing for a second and come back on screen. We are so excited today to have with us the Network for College Success. Before even I tell you a little bit about them, I want to just let you know a few opportunities to participate in today's webinar. First of all, towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. If you have questions during the presentation, please go ahead and put them in there. Members from their team may go ahead and answer those if they're easy to answer during the webinar. But if there are larger, meatier questions, there will be time at the end of the webinar, the last 15 minutes or so, when Sarah and Chris and Del will have an opportunity to answer some of your questions and be in dialogue with each other. The second thing is that most of you should have a calendar invite for a post-event discussion where we'll be getting together in a separate Zoom room and be in community to talk about NCS's presentation today. They have some discussion questions that they're going to be providing us with. They will join, or at least several of them will join as well, and we'll be able to be in community together and to dig into this in small groups. So please stick around today. The webinar is going to be about an hour, but NCS believes that learning happens when people are in dialogue with each other. It's not sitting and getting, it's being in dialogue. And so I know they would really love to see as many of us as possible at that post webinar discussion. We will share a link to that at the end also of today's presentation. So now it's time for me to talk about NCS and these three colleagues that I love so much. So first of all, it's just such an honor to welcome them to today's webinar. The Network for College Success has been behind so much of the tremendous growth we've seen in high school graduation and college enrollment and college success here in Chicago. Their focus in particular on ninth grade on track, but also so much more on data-driven conversations, on data presentation and how to use data, on equity work, racial justice work inside schools, and on networked dialogue between and across schools, have all really become models for districts and nonprofits across the country. Here at the To and Through project, hosting NCS is especially meaningful. For us, from everything from the design of our middle grades network, to the ways that we display and talk about data, to the priority we place on creating and holding brave and necessary equity spaces. Nearly everything we do at the To and Through project has been influenced by NCS. You heard earlier when you joined, we were listening to Sly and the Family Stone, and we are family with them. We like to say that they are our older cousins. And then finally, I would just say on a personal note, I have learned so much about my own leadership, my own identity from the three people that are here today and so many others at NCS. They're mentors, they're friends, they're co-conspirators. And it is such an honor and a pleasure to share this space today with Chris and Sarah and Del. I want to tell you a little bit about each of them. Delrick McCain is the Senior Director of Transformation and Impact with the Network for College Success. Prior to coaching, Del worked for 12 years as a high school teacher in Boston and Chicago. He taught humanities, history, and English to students from 7th to 12th grade. Over the course of his career, Del's experienced unique, broad-based educational opportunities from across the country, serving as the Coalition of Essential Small Schools project coordinator and as a teacher leadership team member with Facing History and Ourselves. Welcome, Del. Krystal Muldrow Payne serves as the co-executive director at the Network for College Success. In her role, she develops supports systems, conditions, and capacity for partner schools locally and nationally, using research and evidence-based practices that are most predictive for high school graduation and college success. She brings over 25 years of experience as a teacher, school leader, team and school leadership coach, and consultant. Welcome, Chris. Sarah Duncan is the co-executive director of the Network for College Success. She began her career with Ariel Education in 1991. The Ariel Community Academy became a community school before the term was popularized, offering before and after school programs, as well as clubs, services for parents, and a unique economics and investment curriculum. Sarah co-founded the Network for College Success in 2006 to support school leaders with research and data, peer networks, and job-embedded coaching to improve student outcomes, particularly high school graduation and college success. So now I will officially turn it over to Chris and Del and Sarah. Take it away.
I just want to thank you so much, Alex and the whole To and Through project for this very kind invitation and the kind words. You know, you're our family and our cousins, as you said, and we're really proud and honored to be in this work with you. So I'm going to kick us off. You already introduced us, but on the next slide, we just have pictures of who we are. This is us, and we're delighted to be here. The 15 years and counting part was because the 15th anniversary happened during the pandemic and we weren't able to celebrate it, unfortunately. So we appreciate you joining in and celebrating this ongoing work with us. Thank you so much. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about our work. We're going to talk a lot about what we learned and talk about implications moving forward. So briefly, here's who we are as a network for college success. In our vision, I want to highlight the word, the last part of the vision, successful lives as adults. We're not just working on graduation, although you'll hear a lot about graduation. Graduation isn't enough. It's really important, but it's not enough. And in the mission, I wanted to highlight this part of organizing schools for improvement in innovation, which is actually also at the end of the mission. By organizing schools to improve and focusing on what matters most, even though many other things may not be perfect, we're able to make the significant changes that you're about to show you. And before we show you that, I wanted to, for most people on the call know what Freshman on Track indicator is, but I wanted to just take a second in case anyone wasn't familiar with it. The Freshman on Track indicator basically shows whether a student is passing enough classes. So it is not supposed to be a standard or of success. It's an indicator of who's struggling. Why we care about this is why it's an important part. It's way, way more predictive of high school graduation than it should be. If you failed a couple classes when you're 14, it should not predict things into your mid-20s, but it does. And since it does, we have to work on it and improve it. All right, the next slide shows Chicago's Freshmen on Track and graduation rates over many years. This starts in 1997. I know that the numbers are very small at the bottom. I want to just explain what you're seeing. The red line is our Freshmen on Track metric. And if anyone's colorblind, it tends to be the top line. And the blue line is the same group's graduation rate 3 years later. Okay, so that's what you're seeing. And this is really something. This is remarkable progress in a really large district over many, many years. And the real uptick, the upticks that you see, there's a long tail that you don't see. Like when I was in high school, it was just the same. The graduation rates were about 50%. So this change is remarkable, and it's been because of the intentional work by many, many people. On the next slide, you'll see the results from the schools that partner with us. We work by partnering with high schools and districts. And we just wanted to show you that how the outcomes data has improved over time. And this is the same kind of graph, the on track against the graduation rate. I want to say, though, that this is not the only thing we see changing in our schools. We also see improvements, not just improvements in outcome data. We also see improvements in young people's experiences and changes in adult practice and adult self-efficacy. The next slide shows our Freshman Success Framework, and I know you can't read that. You can read it on our website. If you just Google the Freshman Success Framework, it pops right up. And for today, I wanted to focus a little bit on these ways of doing, which are adult practices. It's the biggest box right? And it shows roles for different people. So that the whole school can work together to improve the outcomes. These changes the changes that you saw in the data slides were created by adults changing their practice. We did not see like different kids coming into our high schools. These are intentional changes that are made. And this highlights the importance of adults working together in teams, usually across racial difference, to support student success. This is not a one-person job. It's not a heroic effort of an individual. The ways of doing, when you change the way you do your work, they lead to changes in ways of being, which are beliefs and culture. What we see are teachers, adults building growth mindsets, not only about the young people, but about themselves as well, and building their self-efficacy. This work shifts culture, and those culture shifts led us to the enduring understandings that we're going to be sharing with you today. And this is, while our work has some technical elements, I just want to emphasize that this is adaptive and transformative work. And with that, I'm going to pass to my colleague. Dale, you're muted.
My apologies, got one, didn't get the other. Thank you. I was just saying, thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be in this space with you all to share our work and to, more important, share our learning. I think it's important, not just for the exclusive work that we do, exclusively for the work that we do, but more important for how you use shifts in adult collaborative practices to really broaden the impact for students and for young people. So Sarah shared with you our foundational resource that we utilize to shape those new ways of adult collaboration in service of students. And what we found, as Sarah mentioned, is that these new practices lent itself to cultural shifts. And as the data reflects, the process to get into these new cultural ways of being, it also lent itself to some new enduring understandings. And we want to share, three of those more salient understandings and get you all thinking about how meaningful adult collaboration creates communities where both young people and adults thrive. So the first enduring understanding is that this work is, or if we can back up a couple slides, if you don't mind. Yeah, this work is a marathon and not a sprint. If anybody has any association or knowledge of track and running, that this isn't a 4x1. You're not going to be able to see sustainable shifts if you think about it that way. Think of a longer a series, a longer. I'm getting off the track to marathon running because you're going to meet a lot of different ebbs and flows. One of those pieces is that you're trying to change adult practices while simultaneously changing adult beliefs, which in itself is a heavy enough lift just to think about. What we experience actually engaging in that work when partnering with the schools, we anchored in what we call our guiding principles. You can also find our guiding principles on our website as well. But we thought that the three key levers in changing both adult practices while you're simultaneously trying to change adult beliefs is to build the capacity of adults while developing high functioning teams. So specifically, the process of shifting adult practice and beliefs around how they collaborate around data, how they intervene on behalf of students who are struggling, and how they modify and create systems and structures and policies to make incremental steps that create sustainable shifts in the actual way in which you do school, specifically with a focus on ninth grade, right? So we had to weather quite a bit. when we're engaging in this partnership with school and school leadership, on every level, right? One, transitions and changes in leadership from the classroom level all the way up to the district. There was significant interruptions that we had to navigate through, that included strikes and quite most frequently is the pandemic, right? But most important, we had to work with adults to keep this work a priority, regardless of the circumstance, and amidst some serious challenges that individual partners and schools were facing, right? So what is the result of that work? And what does it mean to actually have a guiding belief that this is a sprint, not a marathon? One of our success stories that truly highlights this understanding is our 13-year partnership with Hancock High School. Now Hancock High School was a neighborhood high school on the southwest side of Chicago. It was serving predominantly Latinx students. I name that because that's recently shifted over to being a selective enrollment school. But it's important to know that when we entered into it as a neighborhood school, I'm going to actually share a little bit of my story and experience there. When I began coaching the freshman success coordinator in 2012, I observed meetings. Teachers were constantly discrediting the data in order to avoid engaging in the reflective process. The adult rhetoric around student outward, facing a student behavior was deficit-based, both related to both the students and the community. And most teachers were outwardly expressing their feelings of being overwhelmed, exhausted, and there was kind of what I observed was a culture of apathy, right? But we struggled through, and I'm not saying that it was just this one thing, because we don't believe in silver bullets. I'm saying that it was small incremental changes in practices, right? And it was unrelenting too. It led both classroom teachers and leadership to a place where two dynamics emerged, right? One, the school community began to experience success unlike they had experienced previously. And that noise of mediocrity, it became silent, right? And so the result of that was, one, that data conversations became less about, well, this data reflects the metric and success of the students, to this data reflects my practice. The discourse from adults shifted from a focus on, well, what are the challenges that the students are facing so that I don't have to really necessarily take ownership, to a focus on building the agency of students so that they can create their own path. And this is a thing, the last one is what really kind of speaks to my spirit and soul, is that the beliefs evolved of, hey, we're doing the best that we can do, to this idea that we are solely responsible. We are able to, and we are responsible to create a community where every single student thrives. That includes our least served students, right? And so when you have that change in adult culture, when you have that marathon, sustainable way of trying to approach this work, well, it's going to translate to better student outcomes. And those student outcomes includes, if we a high freshman on track rate, right? And so what we saw was movement from where over a quarter of students were 2 times less likely to graduate from high school on time, to where 98% of the students have twice as likely of a chance to succeed. And I want to put a pin in this real quick and just say that success, and I when working with schools, I always say that success, specifically in schools and with adult collaboration, it is one of the most potent drugs, right? Like, as soon as you get a taste of it, you want more, right? And what happens is once you have that taste of success, you want to take on more. That's that collective efficacy that we can actually change, right? And so our research found that schools that focus on increasing the GPA to a 3.0, cumulative GPA to 3.0 or better, that was a predictor for the post-secondary success. So Hancock took that task on. And so in moving from having close to 100% of success of freshmen on track, move to how do we get better at creating opportunities for students so that they thrive in post-secondary circumstances, right? And so moving from 51% B's or better in ninth grade, which, by the way, if you get that 3.0 or higher in ninth grade, we all know that, listen, you're going to have to, it's easier to maintain that 3.0 than to try to bring that 3.0 up cumulatively as the years progress and as you matriculate from a 2.0 or a 2.5, right? So they had to focus on instruction. And the heavy lift, that collective efficacy resulted in student outcomes, which moved from 51% of students receiving B's or better to up to 87% of students receiving cumulative GPAs of their first year of B's or better. All right. See, the screen is turned off. Are we going to stop here for questions?
I'm trying to get that back up.
Okay. While we work on it, do we want to, I don't know if we want to open up things for questions or.
There was one question
Sure.
to ask if you could talk a little bit more about that culture of apathy that you touched on, and if you felt like it manifested differently among teachers based on their kind of intersectionality of their identities, or did that matter?
The culture of apathy, I think what the variables that contributed to that culture of apathy was really about what adults were facing, which were challenges both within what they were able to do and that collective efficacy within their practice within the schools, being limited to take risks, having to sometimes be more compliant driven than to be driven by what your interests are and what your passion is. So I think there's a number of variables that contributed to that. As it relates to identity, the one thing I will say is that when adults are tied to the community, specifically in ways where it's actually authentic investment into the community, that shows up differently than if you have no tie to the community and you feel like, hey, this is just my job, I just work here. And I think one thing that we saw with this work and the shift is that the ownership that the success of this community is really dependent upon how I show up in this community. And it's not just my job that I'm going to, but I am actually invested in this community, even though I don't live in this community, or I'm not from this community, I'm invested in this community success. Cool. So we're back up. Okay. I'm going to keep things moving along. So the second enduring understanding that emerged from our powerful partnerships with schools and districts throughout these years is that we had to work with communities to really internalize the belief that young people enter into the ninth grade with excellence already in them. It is the adult responsibility to set conditions for that excellence to thrive, right? And so we became aware through the years of these partnerships and this work that the young people were not receiving that message that I'm excellent, I'm great, and I'm here to reinvent myself as a ninth grader. I had my K-8, or I may have had a middle school experience, but for the majority of our Chicago students, it was K-8. I was that student. Now is my opportunity to re-emerge or emerge as who I want to be, right? And as they entered into and matriculated through ninth grade year, they were not receiving those messages, right? So we had to work with adults. But additionally, as I mentioned earlier, there were significant percentages of adults who also harbored some of that deficit outlook around ninth graders, right? And so the work that we had to engage in is shifting practices where we were seeking adults to get them to create sustainable environments where all stakeholders, including themselves, felt that they belonged, that they could be seen, and that their needs could be met. We were also looking to partner with schools and school leaders to transform adult collaborative spaces where they value, prioritize student voice. So that downstream effect was that students felt empowered, right? And then lastly, we wanted to focus on shifting teacher practice and beliefs so that classroom and school environments became places where students felt both challenged and supported to develop their whole selves, right? Not just their academic selves, but that integrated identity, that idea that I can be and set my own course based upon what my wants are and what my needs are, right? And so what resulted from that is another one of our school communities that we really appreciated working with for these 15 plus years in partnership, which is Tilden Career Academy. They're located in Canaryville neighborhood, which is on the south side of Chicago. They're a pretty diverse school serving predominantly Black and Latinx students. I want to mention something that's key here too, that in almost every domain, right, leadership really matters. And Tilden has been a community that's benefited from strong leadership. But moreover, what we saw with this work is that they became a place that started developing and cultivating strong leaders who are purpose-driven, right? And so our work in collaboration with Tilden was starting out with Dr. Marie Sweeney, whose absolute imperative was creating a school environment where students knew they were seen and they were held, and where we worked to incrementally shift adult practice and mindsets and values and beliefs to influence them so that they can think about that I'm no longer compliance driven, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm imperative driven, right? That was that leadership development component. As adults, collectively, collaboratively in this space, we don't see students just as workers, but they are partners with us. We need to develop relationships, strong developmental relationships with our students, so they are walking with us in partnership, so that whatever it is that we're doing in service, we're getting their voice and their input so that we can shape and provide pathways and environments for them to be their best selves. And lastly, when we're talking about this idea of how I'm showing up both in classroom spaces and in general school spaces, that I'm not just a rigid assessor, but I'm actually a warm demander. And we pull that language specifically from Zaretta Hammond's work around culturally responsive teaching in the brain, wherein that a warm demander is someone who develops a strong enough relationship, increases that rigor through high expectations, but that student believes that I can go on this pathway, this journey with this teacher, even though I might be stretching myself to places of discomfort, right? And so when we talk about shifting that culture, some of the best data that we can learn comes from the mouth of students. And on the next slide, we'll see some of that voice, right? And so what we heard students say after we did a focus group, with the students, this was in 2018, I believe, that the students were saying that I can talk to my BAM Becoming a Man teacher, which is the youth guidance program that partners with different schools throughout the country. I can talk to my teacher about my problems, right? Teachers felt that, hey, the students were saying that teachers push me. They're hard on me, but they want you to succeed. And they believe that, right? Another student said that she gives me confidence. I love this. She says, I should major or minor in Spanish in college. So again, providing students with that integrated identity and pathways to say, hey, listen, I am not just this student in this moment in this time. What are my aspirations and my goals, and what are my opportunities? And the other one, I love this one, that math, this student had some swag to him. He was saying that math, again, that's where I'm most confident at. I've been working on college problems, right? And so the shift in adult ways of being led to students expressing these ideas, right? And some of the most valuable data, I feel like, doesn't always come from numbers. It more important comes from the student's voice, right? And what they're experiencing. And in fact, at this moment, I'll posit that if we are creating higher metrics like GPAs, but still killing student spirits or hurting their spirits, then we're in fact failing them worse than if we did not start hurting their spirits just to get to high metrics. The Tilden was a place that developed this community where adults felt efficacious enough. More important, that was their responsibility to hear the needs of students and meet them where they're at, and create conditions for them to thrive and to lean into their excellence. I'm going to now pass it to my colleague, Chris, who's going to take us through the third enduring understanding, as well as some questions.
Thanks, Del. So now we've come to our third and final enduring understanding, and it's seated in the impossibility of any long-term success without an explicit focus on race and equity in education. When we go to the next slide, what you're going to see is that this focus includes exploring and interrogating adult schemas, critically reviewing policies and practices that impact young people, and building the stamina of teams to persist in the cultivation of equitable learning environments. Now, when I say schema, exploration, and interrogation, that starts with surfacing and investigating educators' beliefs, their assumptions, their privilege, their experiences, and their values, and really reflecting on how all of that impacts educating young people, and particularly Black and Brown young people. You may ask us, well, why are you all doing this? It's because this is where fixed mindsets or growth mindsets live about who our young people are and what they're capable of. They have to be surfaced in order for educators to examine them, to reflect upon them, and then move toward more equitable action. Now, when we talk about reviewing policies and practices, we encourage teams to do this to determine which students are served and which are being marginalized, like who gains access and who's actually locked out of opportunities. Which ones are adult-centered, designed for the ease and comfort of adults, and which policies and practices are actually student success-centered. Now, in order to do all of this, then teams need to build stamina, right? They got to build the stamina to persist in these conversations. So how do they do that? One is by establishing norms, and these norms are agreed upon expectations for all team members when engaging in this work. They need to start and continue asking difficult questions about what's getting in the way of student success and how are the adults contributing to that. It's about resisting the urge to speak in terms of what's outside of the team's sphere of influence and change, and resist also that urge to default to some deficit language about our young people. So let's take a look at one school's journey. On the next slide, we introduce you to Back of the Yards College Prep. It's in the Back of the Yards neighborhood, southwest side of Chicago, approximately 1,000 students, and over 98% of them are young people of color. Interestingly enough, they are taught by a largely white staff, and they have maintained freshman on track rates pretty high in the 90s over the past several years. What they identified, though, as their edge of growth is adult mindsets. Thinking about how adults think about students, what they're capable of learning, what they're capable of doing. And then something wonderful happened. What started as a conversation about freshman success actually grew into a school-wide effort. So in the fall of 2020, this school set a goal to co-create necessary conditions toward being an anti-racist school community. And they engaged the entire staff in this experience. All of these experiences you see on this slide. Well, how were they able to sustain this work, sustain this effort, sustain this discourse? Well, they did it, number one, by having norms. And two, what was interesting was that the leadership came through formal leadership and informal leaders rising up to hold conversations, to hold space within racial affinity and across racial difference. And of course, they had coaching from us to continue to build their capacity to have these conversations. So you're like, okay, they had all of these conversations. All right. I'm glad. Well, what happened? I'm glad you asked that question, because on the next slide, you shall see that it led to the staff actually wanting to engage student voice more. They wanted to hear what students were saying about how they experience school and what they want from school. So they had surveys, they had focus groups. And I will say this much, if you want to ask young people what they think and what they want, you have to prepare your heart for the answers. And this is what Back of the Yards young people said. They said they want to see themselves. They said they want to discuss what's going on in the world, what's going on in their communities. They want to know how all of that impacts their learning in the here and now. They even said they want to be in an inclusive community, one where cisgender whiteness is not held up as a standard. And you know what? The adults, the grown-ups heard them, and they did something bold. So fast forward to the summer of 2021, a number of them met with us to decide where to start. From what they were hearing, from what they were seeing, from what they were feeling, from the voices of the young people, it called for a focus on what is taught and who gets a say in that. So a team of teacher leaders, along with support from admin, launched school-wide learning on decolonizing the curriculum. Yep. Decolonizing the curriculum. That was huge. And so they did a bunch of research, and they began with defining decolonizing the curriculum in their own terms and began to operationalize it. On the next slide, what you're going to see is the definition from Back of the Yards. They say at Back of the Yards College Prep, we define decolonizing the curriculum as the critical examination of the role of white supremacist culture and the systems of oppression and hierarchies that have and currently exist. By creating windows and mirrors to see, listen, experience, and question our world, we work to break down and understand the implications that these structures have on the students' experience of our teaching and learning. We strive to recognize and honor the diversity of marginalized and excluded groups to intentionally create access points for mutual growth. Okay, so here we have race and equity conversations amongst the adults. We have adults engaging student voices, and we have willing hearts that led to this. But wait, there's more. I know I sound like an infomercial, but there is more. There's more. Back of the Yards not only maintained freshmen on track rates in the 90s, they also improved the percentage of ninth graders that were earning a 3.0 grade point average. And they saw an improvement in their 5 essentials results. If we go to the next slide, let's take a look at those 5 essentials results. For those of you who are like, what in the world is that? The 5 essentials is a system of surveys that are administered to students, to teachers, to parents. This happens annually, and the goal of it is to gauge the strength of 5 key factors or essentials for school improvement. The scores range for each essential from 1 to 99. The higher the score, the stronger the school is in that essential. Now, we highlight 2 of the 5 essentials because they are most indicative of the impact of Back of the Yards journey and their focus on race and equity. We also should note that there is no data for 2020 due to COVID. But looking at what we have here, taking a look at the data in blue, that is the supportive environment essential. And it speaks to the degree to which students feel safe in and around their schools, the degree to which they find their teachers trustworthy and responsive to their academic needs, and the degree to which they feel supported in their post-secondary planning. When we look at the data in red, that is focusing on collaborative teachers. And this speaks to the degree to which teachers are collaborating to develop themselves professionally, and how are they participating in school improvement efforts. As you can see, there is a remarkable difference in how students and teachers rated these essentials in 2019, which was before the school-wide commitments to a focus on race and equity, and then looking at it in 2021 after that race and equity focus began school-wide. Like, not on this deck, but I should share again that Back of the Yards 9th grade freshman on track rates not only remained in the 90s, but there was also an increase in the percentage of their 9th graders who earned a 3.0 or better GPA. It was 49% in 2019. And by the 2021-2022 school year, the percentage was 65.2% of ninth graders earning a 3.0 or better grade point average. That is phenomenal. And so now not only are students' academic outcomes shifting, the entire environment in which they are learning is more conducive to them becoming college and career ready with the agency, with the integrated identities, with the competencies that will support them to live successful lives beyond high school. So that's a little bit about us and what we've learned over these past 15 years. We've shared with you 3 enduring understandings. 1, freshman success is a marathon. It is not a sprint. 2, young people are entering 9th grade with excellency already in them. And thirdly, you can sustain and have greater impact with an explicit focus on race and equity. So we know that across schools, across districts, across organizations, we have been concentrating heavily on freshmen on track rates. So here we had on the last slide, if you could put the last slide up again, here are some questions that we pose to you to deepen the focus of freshman success holistically. It's about taking a look at how young people are seen, how they're heard, how they're held, how they're honored. Particularly, I always focus on our Black and brown young people in our schools, because we've got to change the conditions for them to change their outcomes. Also, it's about cultivating spaces where students can learn and grow as well as contribute. And then thinking about how it is also important for having powerful learning for the adults, so they show up better and stronger and wiser in service of our young people. All right, so if you go to the next slide. Thanks, Alex. You can stay connected with us, and you may be asking, well, what's in store for the Network for College Success? We are continuing to expand and deepen partnerships with schools and districts across the nation around freshman success, around post-secondary success, and around leadership. And we are continuing this movement. Join us to cultivate equity-based learning environments so that students grow in the agency, identities, and competencies they need to live the life to the fullest when they graduate from high school. So catch up with us. We're on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And with that, thank you so much for your attention and your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Alex.
I think we're going to go into the Q&A. So Chris and Della, if you could join me on the screen. I have some questions lined up for you guys. Del, I was wondering if you would take this question about if students do better, how do we know that it's not just grade inflation? How can we tell that this isn't an artificial effect of people just handing out better grades as opposed to real change?
Yeah, I saw a question that I was responding to, especially this question is really important, especially when you start tackling the work around B's or better. So my response to that is at first, and this is what we find with our work with most schools, that the first step, which at times I even struggle with, is stop failing students. As a professional educator for quite some time, a failure of a student is actually a failure of my practice, but not everybody has that mindset. So we have to first work towards that, right? So when we have adult collaborative spaces that are working on freshmen on track, which is mitigating failure with integrity, that means that I start owning that student success is the reflection of my practice. That takes incremental steps as first of, hey, what are we assessing? Why are we assessing it? These are challenging conversations to have, but you have to set the conditions to have these conversations. What are we assessing across our 9th grade team, and why do we value it? Then we need to start asking questions that students who don't meet expectations or standards, what ways and avenues and pathways can we provide and support for them to actually get the grades that they want to get, right? If we do that work in mitigating failure, again, with the level of integrity, then that instructional shift, the shift in instructional practice, that work is not as hard. And it really, like, this idea of grade inflation doesn't really even come into the conversation, because really what I'm trying to do is not change student outcome. I'm trying to change my practice so that I can ensure as an adult, every student has every opportunity that I can provide possible and imaginable for them to succeed.
Thanks so much, Del. Chris, we have a question about staff turnover, which is definitely a challenge in education and in many industries. So when we started this marathon and we've shifted some culture and we've shifted beliefs, what do we do when there's staff or leadership turnover?
I love that question, because part of the building of sustainability is that leadership isn't isolated to a handful of people in a building. Leadership surfaces when it is needed. I know that as we have been engaging in the freshman success movement over these years, we've encouraged there to be multiple leaders even within a ninth grade success team, so that in the event of any staff turnover, there is someone or someone's who are able to continue to carry the baton. We have actually seen freshmen on track rates stay steady or even improve across changes even in principal leadership. We looked at Hancock High School, which is a school that has maintained a freshman on track rate very high for several years across 3 different principals represented in that data, 3 changes in administration. And so, yeah, it's about building the base. And so that in the midst of turnover, there is always, I call it the remnant, and the remnant will always carry that work forward and ramp others up. Additionally, as the Network for College Success, we work with onboarding, helping to onboard new members of the teams that we work with as well, so that they don't lose as much momentum as they would possibly without having our support there and without having that base, if you will.
Thank you, Chris. Del, I'm going to send one more to you, which is about what happened at Hancock. So the question is sort of saying, like, we know we're trying to work on culture and build like this positive culture, but what are the strategies that, like, what do we take up now?
I saw the question and I know who it came from, and so I really appreciate the person it came from. This is something that I have to say, and I guess I'm just going to ask folks to all lean on faith. Trust the process. Trust the process. If you focus on, like, I'm not saying that the framework is it and that's that. What we have experienced and found that if you really, though, focus on those components and really lean into trying to ramp up every layer and every descriptor, you're going to find a sustained culture of success. You're going to find the increase in adult collective efficacy that says that whatever problems thrown our way, whatever variables thrown that way, we can attack it, like, right? So the strategies, like, hey, look at where do we need to ramp up some of our team functioning as adult collaboration so that we can show up better for our students, right? It might be in the way in which we talk about data, right? And then that's the reason why I love questions like this, because it's so contextual. It's based on the context of the school and the environment, what they might be facing, but identify what is that lever that's preventing us for adults feeling success with that becomes like success for the students. Focus on those levers, ramping them up, and then trust the process. Trust the fact that if we do these things, we will see a sustained shift in culture. And that can be jargony at sometimes. So sorry for taking this much airtime to answer this question, but I think it's important that collective efficacy isn't just doing what the baseline is, or even just doing and having that success and resting on the laurels. What we have seen is that collective efficacies. Now, what's our next problem that we got to take up? Now, what's our next problem? Oh, this pandemic came up. We had to shut down school. Okay, we can do this, right? It becomes this shift where it's like whatever problem we can take up, if we've done the technical things and put them in places where we had found out our gaps and opportunities that we could ramp up those places where we could do better. Once we start doing that and we find success through that, whatever comes our way, we'll do it. And it becomes a sustainable culture and a way of being, just like whatever problem we face, we can, in the service of our students, we can be better.
Thank you so much, Del. And I'm going to turn it back to Alex to take us into our next steps. Really appreciate everyone being here today, and thank you also for the wonderful questions.
Well, thank you everyone for the questions. Please stay with us. First of all, want to thank so much Sarah Duncan, Payne, Del McCain for joining us today, sharing their wisdom from the last 15 years that they've gained through this work and through their network and through their organization. I hope you see why I have personally just so and to and through so much relies on NCS and their brilliance for so much of the work that we do. You'll see in the chat right now, we're going to share a link to a separate Zoom room. We are so excited to dig in here together to have some discussions. If you click on that link, you'll go to the Zoom room. Don McCoy will be hosting that session. And very quickly, we'll be sharing some discussion questions and breaking off into small groups to talk about what we just heard, to make some meaning of it, and to apply it to our own work and situations. So please join us. Click on that link or click on the link in your calendar invite, and we will see you over there in that separate Zoom room for what should be a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much again to the Network for College Success, to Sarah, to Chris, and to Del for sharing their work with us, for making their practice public today. And thank you for joining us. Please be sure to check out some more of our events later this fall. We've got some incredible, other incredible organizations and speakers are going to be sharing some research and some practice with you. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you right now in the separate Zoom room for discussion.